Hello everyone and welcome back to Nocturnal Narrative Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from. Without further ado, let's begin the story. I don't think anyone would have believed me if I hadn't caught it on camera. But even then, the images only raised more questions. It all started out innocently enough. A few months ago, I'd gotten into the habit of snapping photos around my house each day. It wasn't anything special, just routine shots to document the simple things like the view out the kitchen window or the morning light casting shadows in the hallway. I'm a photographer, so it was second nature to look for beauty in the ordinary. But over time, something strange began to happen. At first, I didn't notice it. I was too wrapped up in the usual hustle of work, personal life, and, just trying to keep things moving forward. But then, on a Wednesday evening, as I was reviewing the pictures from the day before, I caught something odd: the dining table. In one photo, it was perfectly set with the evening's leftovers from dinner. But in the next shot, taken only an hour later, it was different. A chair that had been facing the wall was now angled toward the window. I had not moved it. I know I hadn't. I brushed it off at first. Maybe I was just losing track of time. Maybe I had moved it myself earlier and forgotten. But over the next few days, the changes became harder to ignore. It wasn't just the furniture, it was everything. The curtains would be pulled back in one shot, then completely drawn in the next. A book on the coffee table would have shifted, slightly, or the clock on the wall would be 2 minutes ahead in one picture, 2 minutes behind in another. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I woke up one morning to check the photos from the night before. My camera had an automatic setting to take pictures at set intervals, mostly just to capture the changing light and shadows throughout the house. I had no real reason to expect anything unusual, but as I flicked through the photos, my heart sank. In one of the pictures, I saw it. The front door, wide open. I know I locked it the night before. I remember double-checking before going to bed. But in the photo, it was wide open. The light from the hallway spilling out onto the front step. The camera had caught the image at exactly 3:12 a.m. I must have checked the locks 100 times that day. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was half asleep and didn't remember unlocking it. But then I started reviewing the other photos from that night. Something was off. The hallways seemed longer in some photos, the shadows deeper, the angle of the shots slightly different. In one, the hallway outside the kitchen was blurred, like someone had walked through just before the camera clicked. In another, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the reflection of the living room window, I could see a shape, a figure, barely visible. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or maybe my camera's reflection, but I zoomed in, my pulse racing, and that's when I saw it. The shape was moving, the figure. It was watching. I don't know how I didn't notice before, but now that I did, I couldn't unsee it. The house, my house, was changing, subtly, but unmistakably, rearranging itself to get a better view of its inhabitants. I didn't sleep for 2 nights straight, reviewing every image, trying to figure out what was going on. I even tried taking a few pictures with my phone in the middle of the night, thinking maybe I was just seeing things. But no matter what, the changes kept appearing. The house wasn't just watching, it was becoming something else. It wasn't. Long before I started feeling like something was watching me, not just through the lens of the camera. At night, I'd hear the creaking of floorboards, a soft shuffle behind me when I was alone. It felt like I was being followed, like I wasn't alone in my own home anymore. One evening, I decided to confront whatever it was. I set up the camera to capture the entire house from every angle, hoping that somehow I could catch whatever was behind it. I stood in the center of the living room, camera in hand, waiting. The lights flickered, the air grew thick, and then I saw it on the screen. a slow shift as though the house itself was gently nudging its foundations. A corner of the living room seemed to move. The walls shifted just a bit. The floorboards creaked in a new pattern. It wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. The house was repositioning itself to watch me. The photos, the subtle movements, they weren't random. This place, this house, was aware, and it was adjusting, slowly but surely, to observe its inhabitants more closely. I don't know what happens next. I've stopped taking photos, but I feel its gaze, always there, always watching. It's as if the house is growing more alive with every passing day. And I have no idea what it wants, but I'm sure of one thing. It's never going to stop watching. I was never the type to get spooked easily. The kind of person who laughs off the creaks of an old house or shrugs when a door mysteriously slams shut. But when we started our home renovation project, things began to change. It was supposed to be a simple job. We bought a small old house in the suburbs, needing some updates here and there, nothing major. We were just looking to fix up the kitchen, maybe rework the attic into a usable space and replace some old flooring. But as we got into the crawl space beneath the house, that's when everything started to get weird. It began with the sounds. At first I thought it was just the house settling. Houses do that, right? They creak and groan, especially older ones like ours. But the noises came at night when everything else was still, and I began to notice a pattern. There were sounds of scratching, dragging, like something, or someone, was moving underneath the floorboards. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible. I'd lie in bed hearing the sounds echoing through the house. It was easy enough to dismiss as rats or maybe old pipes, but as the days went on, the noises grew louder, more distinct. One evening, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of reluctant curiosity, I crawled into the crawl space. It wasn't the best place to be, dusty and claustrophobic, but I had to find out what was making those noises. I made my way through the narrow passage between the floor joists, my light flickering in the dark. The air was thick, musty with the scent of old wood and damp earth. It was silent now, eerily so. I shone my flashlight around, looking for any signs of movement, but all I saw were pipes and beams. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then, my beam of light caught something, a shape. It was at the far corner of the crawl space, partially hidden behind a stack of old insulation. At first I thought it was just a pile of debris, but as I got closer I realized it was a pile of old clothing. Ripped, tattered clothes. My stomach churned. I leaned in closer, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. And that's when I saw it, a hand, a small hand emerging from the pile of clothes. It was pale, too pale, and it was twitching slightly as if it were trying to move, but couldn't. I jumped back, my heart hammering in my chest. I stumbled out of the crawl space and back into the living room, my breath coming in short gasps. I don't know why I didn't scream. Maybe I was too terrified to make a sound. I told my husband about it later, of course. He was skeptical, of course. It's probably just an old toy or some kind of animal nest, he said, trying to brush it off. But I knew what I saw, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been down there. The following day, I made my way back into the crawl space, this time with my husband in tow. We cleared out the pile of insulation, the pile of old clothes, the debris. The space felt colder than it had before, and the air seemed to thicken with an unsettling heaviness. We pulled up the last of the old insulation, and that's when we saw it. The wall. It wasn't a normal wall. It was made of old brittle wood, the kind that had been part of the house's original construction. But behind it there was another space, a hidden crawl space within the crawl space, narrow and dark. I felt my pulse quicken as we forced our way through the hidden opening. Inside, the darkness felt suffocating, like it was closing in around us. There, in the dark, we found it. A family. Not a family like you and I would think of, but a family nonetheless. They were huddled together in the dark, their bodies thin and gaunt, their eyes wide with fear. Their clothes were old and tattered, and their skin was unnaturally pale. They looked like they had been living there for years, maybe decades. And as we stood there, frozen in disbelief, they didn't move. They just stared at us. I don't know what they were doing down there. I don't know how they got there. But the longer I stared, the more I realized they weren't just hiding. They were waiting. I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I recall, we were back upstairs sitting in the living room, the daylight filtering in through the windows. I don't know if we were in shock or if the memory was too much to process. But when we went back downstairs to investigate, again the hidden crawl space was gone. It was just a wall again, solid, unmoving. We never told anyone about what we found. I couldn't. How could I explain what we'd seen? How could I tell anyone that a family, a whole family, had been living under our house, hidden in the walls for who knows how long? But every night when the house creaks and groans, I can still hear them, scratching, moving in the dark, still waiting, still hiding somewhere deep beneath the floorboards. And sometimes when the night is especially quiet, I swear I hear footsteps moving across the floor above me as if they've decided to follow me into the house. I don't know how long we'll be able to stay here, but I do know one thing. The crawlspace family isn't going anywhere. Love the story? Show us with a like, hit that subscribe button, and share your scariest idea in the comments. And don't forget to tell us the time and where you're listening from. We want to know where the fear is spreading. When we bought the house, we thought we were making the perfect choice. It was a modern smart home, everything controlled by voice commands and connected through an app on our phones. The lighting, the heating, even the security cameras. Everything was supposed to make life easier. No more fumbling for switches or worrying about whether we locked the door. At first, everything was great. We had the security system set up, the temperature just right, and the smart speakers playing soft music in the background. But then, a few weeks after we moved in, we started to notice something strange. It began with the static. At night, when the house was quiet, we would hear this odd, crackling noise coming from the smart speakers. It wasn't the normal buzz you get from a malfunctioning device. It was something different, something unsettling. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, maybe a poor connection or a malfunctioning speaker. But then the voices started. It wasn't much at first, just soft whispers, as if someone was talking between the frequencies. I thought it was just the neighbors, their voices somehow being picked up through the system. But then the whispers began to sound less human, more like distorted static with the occasional word or phrase slipping through. I brushed it off as interference, but then, one night, it got louder. I was lying in bed, just drifting off to sleep, when I heard it again, louder this time, more distinct. The static swirled into a low murmur, and then I caught a word. Help. I sat up, startled. Was that a voice? I checked the app on my phone, but everything looked normal. No alerts, no warnings. The system was running fine. I tried to ignore it, convinced I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the next night, the voices returned. Only, this time, they were clearer, and they weren't just whispers anymore, they were full sentences. Don't look behind you. Where are you going? I froze, my heart raced. Who was talking? I rushed to the living room to check the speakers, the cameras, but everything was off. The house was empty, as it should be, but the voices didn't stop. They kept coming, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day. The static would fill the house, and in the gaps between the crackling noises, I'd hear something else. A child crying, a woman calling for someone, and sometimes what sounded like footsteps shuffling around the house. It was then that I started noticing the patterns. The voices weren't random. They seemed to be tied to certain parts of the house. The nursery, always there, a soft lullaby playing, then silence. The kitchen, dishes clinking, faint laughter, then the quiet thud of a door closing. It felt Like these voices were moving through the house somehow. Not like they were recorded, but like they were happening in real time, on some other plane of existence. The static didn't feel like interference, it felt like a gateway, a connection between dimensions. I tried everything. I unplugged the system, reset the speakers, even disconnected the internet. But every time I turned the system back on, the voices returned. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I stayed up watching the cameras and listening to the static. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard something that made my blood run cold. The voice wasn't in the speakers this time. It was in the room with me. "I can see you," it said, clear as day, though no one was there. I whipped around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. The static still hummed, the system running smoothly, no sign of any problem. That's when I realized the voices weren't coming from the system. They were coming from in the house. The system was just the way they communicated, a portal between worlds. I tried to tell my family, but no one believed me. My husband thought it was just a technical glitch, and the kids, well, they were just excited about the idea of a haunted house. But for me, it was more than that. I could feel the presence of something or someone moving through the house, touching the edges of reality. The voices grew more frequent and the static more intense. It felt like we were living on the edge of two worlds, and at any moment one might slip through the cracks. One night, the voice spoke again, this time louder and more forceful. "We're coming through." The static surged. The temperature dropped. The lights flickered, and then nothing. The house went silent. I waited, breath held, for something, anything. But the moment passed. The static stopped. The voices went silent. For a few days it was calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the house was holding its breath. I still hear the whispers sometimes, faintly, between the static. It's almost as if they're waiting for something, waiting for us to slip. And every time I walk through the house, I can't help but wonder, what if the next time the voices don't stop? What if the next time they don't fade away? What if they come through? It wasn't supposed to be this way. I moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood to start fresh. New job, new town, new beginning. The house was perfect, exactly what I needed. It had a nice garden, a cozy living room, and the kitchen was spacious, enough to cook and entertain. It seemed like the kind of place where nothing ever went wrong, where neighbors waved at you as you came home and kids played on the sidewalks. But I didn't realize then how wrong I was. It started small. Little things at first, like the lights flickering when I was in the middle of doing something, or the feeling of being watched when I sat on the couch. But I ignored them. After all, who wouldn't feel a little paranoid after moving to a new place? The real strange thing began when I started meeting my neighbors. On the surface, they seemed perfectly normal, just like everyone else in the neighborhood. There was Emily, the stay-at-home mom who lived next door with her 2 kids. The Martins, an older couple across the street, who were always out walking their dog. And then, there was Mrs. Caldwell, a sweet older woman who lived 2 doors down. I met all of them in the first few days. Everyone was so friendly, offering to help me with anything I might need. Emily even offered to bring over a casserole one evening when I was unpacking. It was nice, really. It felt like I had fallen into a community where everyone looked out for each other. But then one morning I got home from work and noticed something strange. The front door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it when I left, I always do. But there it was, the door standing ajar, just slightly, as if someone had been inside. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Had I just forgotten to lock it? Was I being careless? I checked the house. Nothing seemed out of place. No drawers were opened. Nothing was missing. But the feeling of unease settled in. It wasn't until the next week that things started getting even weirder. I'd been working late, and as I got home, I noticed something on the doormat. It was a small envelope with no return address. Inside, there was a note. "Hope you had a good day. Don't forget to lock up tonight. Emily." I was stunned. Emily? The neighbor? I thought maybe it was some sort of joke. But how did she know I had left my door unlocked? I decided to talk to her about it the next time I saw her. When I did, she acted surprised, as if she didn't know what I was talking about. "I didn't leave anything on your doorstep," she said with a forced smile. Maybe it was someone else. But deep down, I knew she was lying. The next few days passed without incident, and I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But then, one night, as I was sitting on the couch watching TV, I heard something, the faintest click. I froze, listening carefully. There it was again. Click. The sound was coming from the front door. I stood up, walked quietly toward the door, and glanced through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. A key was turning in the lock, as though someone was unlocking it from the outside. I rushed to the door, and when I opened it, no one was there. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as I stood there in the cold, staring at the empty front steps. How had someone gotten a key? The next day, I went to the hardware store and had all the locks changed. But that didn't stop the feeling that something was wrong. The following week, I came home to find the door cracked open again. This time there was no note, no sign of anyone having been inside. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I wasn't imagining it. Someone had been coming into my house. Someone who had access to a key. That night I went over to Emily's house to confront her. She answered the door, with that same pleasant smile, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about her. I asked her about the key. "Do you have a key to my house?" She looked at me for a long moment, and then, slowly, she nodded. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't want you to know this way, but I'm the one who gave the neighbors keys to your place." I was stunned. "What? Why would you do that?" Her eyes darted around, almost as if she was searching for a way to explain it, but her words came out in a rush. It's part of the community here. We look out for each other. When you moved in, we thought you might need a little extra help settling in. But why would you need a key to my house?" She hesitated, her smile fading. "We all have one, just in case, emergencies. We take care of each other here." I felt my stomach twist. My mind was reeling. I had no idea what she meant by that. I tried to leave, but as I stepped out of her house, I turned around and saw the others standing in their windows watching me. The Martins, Mrs. Caldwell, all of them. It hit me then. Everyone had a key to my house. And I didn't have any idea how far this had gone, how deep this twisted web had been woven around me. That night, I locked every window, every door, and stayed up all night, listening for the slightest sound. The next day, I put the house up for sale. I couldn't stay there anymore. But as I was packing up, I found something odd. An old key, hidden behind one of the bookshelves in the living room. It wasn't mine. It was the key to my house. I don't know how it got there, but I do know this. I'll never feel safe in a place where the neighbors have keys to my home, and I'll never forget the way Emily's smile faltered when she said, "We're all here for you. I'm just not sure who we really are." Marcus had worked the night shift at the old factory for years. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and the quiet of the place gave him a sense of peace. The building had been abandoned for almost a decade, the floors echoing with the sounds of nothing, just the hum of the occasional light flickering above. Marcus wasn't afraid of the building. It was just a job after all. But there was something about the place that always felt off. The first thing he noticed were the sounds, not during the day, when the building was empty and sunlight spilled through the dusty windows, but at night, when it was dark, when the wind howled through the broken panes and rattled the rusted pipes. There were noises, not just the usual creaks and groans of an old building settling, but strange, irregular sounds. Footsteps, soft murmurs, and the unmistakable scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. At first, Marcus thought it was just the building itself. Old metal, shifting beams, things rubbing together. The place had been built a century ago, after all. But then one night he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. He was on his rounds, walking the dimly lit hallways, when he heard a distinct whisper. "Marcus." He froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The hallway was empty. No one else was there. He checked the security cameras on his phone. The building was deserted, as it should have been. There was no one in the lobby, no movement in the upper floors, nothing. Shaking his head, he convinced himself it was just his imagination, the silence playing tricks on him. Maybe he was just tired. After all, he had been pulling these long hours for weeks. But it happened again the next night. This time the whisper wasn't as soft. It was closer, more distinct. "Marcus, look at us." Marcus spun around, but once again the hallway was empty. He checked the cameras again. Nothing. No one. Something was wrong. The next few nights the whispers grew louder, clearer, and more frequent. He'd hear them while walking past certain rooms, faint murmurs coming from behind closed doors, as if someone was waiting for him to hear them. He started to get used to it, almost like he was anticipating the voices. Then, it escalated. One night, while walking past a room at the far end of the building, Marcus heard something much worse than whispers. He heard footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, like someone was walking right behind him. He spun around, but the hallway was empty. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The building felt different, as though the air itself was thickening around him. He checked the security cameras again, but there was nothing. Nothing except the same static-filled screens. Marcus tried to shake it off. He told himself it was just stress. He was alone in the dark for hours at a time. It was easy for the mind to play tricks. But then, it happened. As he was making his way through the factory's main floor, he saw them, figures, standing just out of his line of sight, lingering. At the edges of his peripheral vision, they were always just barely visible, nothing more than fleeting shadows moving in the darkness. When he turned to face them, they were gone. But when he looked away, they returned. The figures didn't move like normal people. They didn't walk with purpose. They hovered as if they were waiting for him to notice them. And they didn't look right. Their shapes were too distorted, too faint, as if they were shifting between the walls and the floor. Not entirely part of the building, but not entirely separate from it either. Marcus was starting to feel like he was losing his mind. The next night, it got worse. As he passed by the broken windows in the rear of the building, he saw something that stopped him dead in his tracks. In the reflection, he saw a figure standing behind him. No, two figures. One was tall and the other was hunched, almost crawling. Their faces were obscured, but he could tell they were staring at him, watching him from the shadows. Marcus whipped around, but there was no one there. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with an oppressive silence. He checked his watch. It was almost time for his shift to end, but something inside him told him to leave, to run. But he couldn't. He was stuck. Every time he turned his back, the figures appeared. Every time he walked away, they followed. Just out of sight, just at the edge of his vision, always watching. It was becoming unbearable. One night, while walking the lower floors, Marcus saw something he never should have. He rounded a corner, his flashlight illuminating the hallway ahead when he saw them, the squatters. They were standing there just like before, but now they were solid, tangible, real. Their faces were twisted, contorted in expressions of pain and hunger, their clothes torn and ragged. They were looking directly at him now, not just lingering in the shadows, but standing in full view. Before he could react, they moved. Slowly, almost purposefully toward him. Marcus backed away, his heart pounding in his chest, but they kept coming. One dragging its foot, the other stumbling with every step. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as though they were caught between two worlds, struggling to stay in the one they were in. He turned and ran. The footsteps followed him, echoing in the halls, getting closer. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and the figures appeared at every corner, blocking his path. He could feel them. They were closing in on him. By the time Marcus finally reached the front doors, he was nearly in a panic. He pushed against them, but they wouldn't budge. His breath came in ragged gasps as the figures surrounded him, their faces twisting into grotesque smiles. "Stay with us, Marcus," one of them whispered. "You belong here now." With a final burst of adrenaline, Marcus shoved the doors open, stumbling out into the night. He didn't look back. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. When he finally got home, he locked the doors, closed the blinds, and collapsed onto the couch, trying to steady his breathing. He didn't go back to the factory, and he never will. The squatters are still there, still watching from the dark corners of the building. And Marcus knows now, he'll never truly be alone, not while they're still in his peripheral vision. Love the story? Show us with a like, hit that subscribe button, and share your scariest idea in the comments. And don't forget to tell us the time and where you're listening from. We want to know where the fear is spreading. It started with a strange letter. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was meant for the previous tenants of our house. But then I read it again, more carefully, and something about it seemed off. The letter was old-fashioned, printed on yellowing paper with ornate script that I couldn't quite make sense of. The envelope was unmarked, save for the address. It was delivered to my front door one crisp autumn morning, a time when most letters I received were bills or advertisements. The letter was addressed to me personally, and after reading it once, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was meant for us, meant for our family. It had been waiting for us. "Dear Sir, Madam," it began, "you are hereby reminded of the family protocol to receive guests on the night of the full moon. It is essential that all traditions are followed as set forth by the elders. Should you fail to adhere to these rules, there will be dire consequences." I stopped there, staring at the paper. What was this, a prank? It was too elaborate to be just some joke, too detailed, too urgent. I read the rest of the letter. Failure to comply with the house guest protocol will result in an irreversible change. These visitors are not of this world, nor do they follow the same rules that govern our lives. Treat them with respect. Do not refuse them, no matter what. The full moon is approaching, and the guests will arrive promptly at midnight. Ensure the doors are open and the guest room is prepared. You will know when they arrive. Be ready. I had no idea what to make of it. I showed it to my husband John, but he just laughed and brushed it off. Probably some kind of marketing scam or something. Let's just toss it. But I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my stomach. The letter kept resurfacing in my mind, especially when the next full moon approached. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just some weird coincidence. But then I remembered the warning. You will know when they arrive. As the night of the full moon drew closer, I began to feel it, a sense of anticipation. Something was off. The air felt heavier, and the shadows seemed darker than usual. John had gone to bed early, and I stayed up, staring out the window at the rising moon. It was bigger than I had ever seen it before, glowing an eerie, unnatural shade of orange. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At midnight, a soft knock echoed through the house. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but it wasn't this. I hadn't heard anything before, no sounds of footsteps or movement, just the knock. It was quiet, deliberate, like a signal. I grabbed the letter from my desk and looked at it once more. The words seemed clearer now, and my stomach twisted into knots. They had said I would know when they arrived. I stepped toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The house was silent, too silent, and I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on me. I opened the door. Standing there, in the dim light of the porch, was a figure. It was tall, draped in a long, dark cloak with the hood pulled low over its face. For a moment, I couldn't see any features, just the shadowy outline of a figure standing in the doorway. My breath caught in my throat. The figure said nothing, but I could feel it watching me. I didn't know how, but I felt it. I stepped back instinctively, but the figure did not move. It remained motionless, waiting. I opened the door wider, unsure of what to do. My mind raced with the warnings from the letter, the words echoing in my head. Treat them with respect. Do not refuse them. My voice came out as a whisper, but it was the only thing I could say. Who are you? The figure tilted its head, and for the first time I saw its eyes. They were not like human eyes. They were black, deep, endless, like two voids pulling me in. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I couldn't break the gaze. It spoke, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves, faint and distant. We are here as expected. You have prepared the guest room? I nodded, barely able to keep my voice steady. Yes, I said. I've prepared the room. The figure stepped forward, its long cloak sweeping across the floor like a shadow. My mind was screaming at me to close the door, to refuse it, but the letter's words kept playing over and over in my head. I couldn't. The figure glided past me into the house, and I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air turned cold, biting, and it wasn't just the breeze from outside. It was the presence that had followed the figure into the house. I stepped back, and before I could speak, another figure appeared at the edge of the yard, standing silently at the foot of the stairs. This one was even taller, its face obscured by an even darker hood. I could hear more footsteps now too, echoing from the shadows. More figures emerged, appearing from the edges of my vision, as if they had always been there, waiting. I wanted to scream, to shut the door, to run, but I couldn't. It was like I was under some kind of spell, compelled to follow through with the instructions, to prepare the guest room, to offer them what they wanted. They weren't human. I knew that now. They didn't speak to me again, but I could feel them watching as I led them to the guest room, the room I had prepared just as the letter had instructed. The guests entered one by one, and I could see their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They moved with a fluidity that made no sense, like shadows stretching into the night. When they were settled in, I backed away slowly, not daring to break their gaze. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I wasn't supposed to ask. I wasn't supposed to refuse. And then, just like that, they were gone. The next morning, the house was as it always was. No sign of the guests, no trace of their presence. The guest room was empty, the bed perfectly made as though no one had ever been there. The cold that had filled the house the night before was gone. But something was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just welcomed something into my life that I wasn't meant to. Later, when I went to check the mail, there was another letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The same ornate script. I hesitated before opening it. We will return next month at the next full moon. The house is not yet complete. Be prepared. I dropped the letter, feeling the weight of its message pressing into me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had invited something into my home, something that wasn't supposed to be here, and it would be back. It was a quiet, peaceful night. The kind of night where everything seemed to settle into place. No noise from traffic, no interruptions, just the soft hum of a peaceful evening. Our nursery was tucked in the corner of the house, the smallest room with pale blue walls and soft curtains that fluttered slightly when the wind passed through. Our little girl, Ella, had just turned 6 months old, and I'd taken every measure to make sure her room was perfect, safe, cozy, and calm. I remember the first time I noticed it. It wasn't anything alarming at first, just a small detail. I had gone into the nursery to check on Ella before bed, just like I did every night. The room was exactly as I had left it. Quiet, peaceful, But then, as I was about to leave, I glanced over at the window and saw that it was slightly ajar. It shouldn't have been. I had locked it earlier that evening, right after I had put Ella to bed. The latch was one of those older types, the kind that slides into place with a satisfying click, and I remembered doing it with my own hands. It was a small thing really, but it unsettled me. Must have forgotten to check it again, I muttered to myself. I was tired after all. Parenting takes a lot out of you, especially in the early months. So, I went over and shut the window, making sure the latch was secure this time, and went on to bed, pushing the strange feeling to the back of my mind. But that night, it happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night to a soft creak, the kind of noise you hear in older houses. At first I thought it was the house settling, but then I remembered the window. I froze, lying in bed with my heart racing. I didn't move for a moment, but after what felt like an eternity, I finally pulled myself up, throwing on my robe as I made my way down the hall to the nursery. And there it was again, the window, wide open. No breeze, no reason for it to be like that. The chill of the night air was pouring into the room, causing the curtains to flutter gently. I stared at it for a moment, my mind racing. I was sure I had locked it again. I went to close it, my hands trembling slightly as I slid the window shut. That's when I noticed something else, the wet footprints on the floor. They were small, too small to be mine, and they were scattered across the nursery floor, from the window, across the floor, and ending near Ella's crib. I blinked, unsure of what I was seeing. My heart hammered in my chest. How could there be wet footprints? Ella was sleeping soundly in her crib, the blanket barely moving with her soft breaths. I moved closer, but she didn't stir. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had accidentally left a window open in the bathroom or somewhere else in the house, and some rainwater had come in. But that didn't explain the small footprints, the cold air, or the fact that the window had been open again. I checked the rest of the house, but there were no signs of anything else. Nothing to explain how the room had gone from warm to cold, or how the window had opened itself. I closed the window again, locked it carefully, and spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair beside Ella's crib, unable to sleep. I kept telling myself it was just a fluke, just a weird coincidence. Maybe there was an air current that I hadn't noticed, something I hadn't accounted for. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next night, I locked the window again, before going to bed. I even made a mental note to double-check it when I went to bed to be absolutely sure that it was secure. But when I went in the next evening, the same thing happened. The window was open. At this point, I started to feel a creeping sense of dread that I couldn't explain. It wasn't just a locked window that was mysteriously opening anymore. It was the feeling that I was being watched, that something was in the room with us, something I couldn't see but could sense. Every time I went into the nursery, it felt like I wasn't alone. This time, when I saw the window wide open again, I didn't immediately close it. I stood there for a moment, just staring at it. The chill in the room seemed to deepen, and the air felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I didn't want to investigate further. I was scared, but what truly shook me to my core were the wet footprints. They were still there, trailing from the window, but now they had appeared even closer to Ella's crib. I couldn't ignore them anymore. Something, or someone, was coming into that room. I stayed up that night, sitting in the chair by the window. I made sure the window was locked, checked it twice, and waited, watching the room. I even left the lights on just to be sure that I wasn't imagining things. Hours passed. The house was completely still. I nearly nodded off when I heard it, a soft shuffling sound. I sat up straight, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to listen. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It came from the floor, the wet slapping sound of small feet moving across the nursery floor. But when I turned to look, the room was empty. Ella was still sound asleep in her crib, undisturbed, her tiny hands curled into fists. I jumped to my feet, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Nothing to explain the noise, nothing to explain the footprints. I checked the window again, and this time I didn't close it. I just stood there, staring at it. What was going on? In the following days, I tried to make sense of it. I researched everything I could think of. I considered everything from simple drafts to air pressure to paranormal activity. The logical side of me told me to calm down, to stop overreacting. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't deny it. The footprints, the cold, the noise. It wasn't just coincidence. Something, or someone, was coming into that room every night. After another week of sleepless nights, I decided to install a camera in the nursery. I had to know what was happening while I wasn't there. I needed proof, something that could explain it. I set it up carefully, making sure it had a clear view of the window and the floor. The next night, I watched the footage. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I saw it. The window creaked open just like the other nights. But this time I could see something else. A shadow, small and indistinct, moving across the floor. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything human. But the footprints appeared, one by one, as though someone was walking across the room, leading from the window to Ella's crib. I couldn't breathe. My heart was in my throat, my eyes glued to the screen. But the shadow never came closer to Ella. It never touched her, never made a sound, as if it was just passing through, as if it had no intention of staying. I don't know what it is, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever is coming through that window every night isn't of this world. I don't know what it wants or why it's there, but it's been visiting us for weeks. I don't know how to make it stop. I can't move. I can't leave. Ella needs me here, and I can't protect her from something like this. All I can do is wait and hope it doesn't come closer. But every night, the window opens. And every night, the footprints appear. I always thought I knew what it meant to buy a house. I figured it was just a matter of finding something within my budget, something that suited my needs, spacious, quiet, and easy to manage. But when I found the house on Elm Street, something about it felt different. It wasn't just the space or the price, it felt familiar. The house had been on the market for a while, so the owner was eager to sell. It was an older home, a colonial-style structure with a wraparound porch and tall arched windows. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like I had walked into a memory, like I had been there before. I couldn't explain it. The creaky wooden floors, the smell of old wood and dust in the air, the slight draft that came through the windows. It all felt so right. My agent told me it had been on the market for a while, and that the previous owners had moved out unexpectedly. She didn't say much else about them, but I didn't think much of it. I was just excited to finally have a place of my own. The first few weeks were peaceful enough. I moved in slowly, unpacking boxes, cleaning, and arranging furniture. The house felt big, but it was manageable. There were little things, of course, like the creaking in the floorboards at night or the strange sound of footsteps upstairs when I was the only one home, but nothing that truly bothered me. I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe my imagination. It wasn't until I started noticing certain things that I began to question my decision. It started with the pictures. I found one tucked away in a drawer in the living room, hidden under some old papers. It was a photo of a family, 2 parents, a young boy, and a little girl. They were standing on the porch, smiling at the camera, their faces warm and welcoming. I turned the photo over, hoping to find a name, but there was nothing. No date, no note. Just the family, frozen in time. The second photo appeared a few days later, this time in the hallway. It was a picture of the same family, but this time, the boy was holding a small dog. I didn't think much of it at first, except that the boy looked familiar. I didn't know why, but I kept staring at the photo as if I recognized him from somewhere. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. Then, there was the sound. It started as a soft tapping, almost like a knock on the door. But no one was there when I opened it. It happened every night around midnight, as though someone was gently knocking on the door trying to get in. I didn't know what to make of it. I figured it was just the wind, or the house settling. After all, it was an old place, and houses, like that, make all kinds of strange noises. But then the tapping grew louder. It became a pounding, a frantic knocking that echoed through the house, shaking the walls. I'd rushed to the door, but when I opened it, there was nothing. No one on. The porch, nothing at all. I checked the security cameras, but they were blank. No signs of movement, no explanation. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to get inside. One night, I decided to do a little research on the house. I went to the town library and dug through the old records, hoping to find something about the previous owners. The more I looked, the stranger things got. The house had been built in the 1920s, but there were no records for the previous family who had lived there. The most recent owners, the ones who had moved out, were listed, but there was nothing about the family in the photos. No mention of them anywhere. It was as if they had never existed. When I returned home that evening, the tapping started again. But this time, it wasn't just the door. It was coming from inside the house, upstairs, in the hallway, outside my bedroom door. The knocking was persistent, like someone was waiting for me to open it. I was exhausted and terrified, so I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to the attic, hoping to find some answers. The door was old and heavy, and the staircase creaked as I made my way up. The attic was a mess, filled with boxes of old clothes and furniture, things left behind by the previous owners. I rifled through the boxes, hoping to find something that explained the odd occurrences, something that would shed light on what was happening in the house. And then I found it. There was another photo, hidden in a box at the back of the attic. It was the same family, but this time the parents weren't smiling. The boy and girl were standing in front of the house, but their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. The parents were looking at the camera, but they weren't smiling. They looked haunted. I turned the photo over, and there it was, written in the same handwriting as the others. They never left. I felt my blood run cold as I stared at the words. The family had never left. But how was that possible? I could feel something shifting in the air around me. The temperature dropped, and the room felt suddenly heavy, oppressive. I could hear the tapping again, but this time it wasn't just from one place. It was all around me, coming from every direction. The knocking, the pounding, the sound of footsteps moving through the house, getting closer and closer. I ran down the stairs, heart pounding in my chest. The door to the basement was wide open now, and as I looked down into the darkness, I saw movement. There, at the bottom of the stairs, was the family. The parents, the boy, the girl, standing in the doorway, their faces expressionless, their eyes dark and hollow. They didn't speak, but I knew they were waiting for me to come down. I backed away slowly, the door slamming behind me as I turned and ran out of the house. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at the house. The family, the photos, the knocking, it all made sense now. The house remembered its previous occupants, and it had been trying to recreate the tragedy that had occurred here years before. I never returned. I couldn't, and I left the house behind, knowing that it would always remember, that it would always bring back the family, over and over again, until someone finally opened the door. I never thought much about my son's sleepwalking. It wasn't the first time it had happened. He'd done it off and on for years, ever since he was little. It was harmless, or at least that's what we thought. That all changed about a month ago, when he started sleepwalking at night in a way that was different from before. At first, it was just small things. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and shuffle around the house aimlessly, bumping into furniture, then eventually wander back to his room. He'd never really go anywhere specific. It seemed like the usual sleepwalking episodes. But as the nights went on, it started to get weird. I noticed it one Thursday night. I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. It was around 2 a.m., and the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I thought maybe I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps, slow and dragging. I immediately checked the hallway, and that's when I saw him. My son, barely visible in the dim light of the living room, his eyes closed, his body stiff. He was sleepwalking again, but this time something was off. He was standing by the front door, like he was waiting for something. I called his name, softly, not wanting to wake him completely. "Daniel, what are you doing?" No response. He just stood there like a statue. Then, almost as if in a trance, he slowly turned and started walking towards the door. I rushed over and grabbed his shoulder. "Daniel, stop. Let's get you back." "To bed," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though I could feel my heart racing. But as soon as I touched him, he jerked away, his eyes still closed. He let out a low, almost inhuman grunt, and, without any hesitation, opened the door. I froze. Knew he was sleepwalking, but this felt different, like he wasn't in control of his own movements. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was guiding him, pulling him outside. I tried to stop him again, but he shrugged me off with unsettling strength. It was like I wasn't even there. I followed him, panic setting in. The door was wide open now, the cool night air pouring in. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Daniel," I called again, but he didn't respond. His footsteps were steady, purposeful. I didn't know what to do. I stood there in the doorway, watching him walk toward the street, as if he was being drawn to something or someone out there in the dark. I wanted to follow him, but something told me not to. It was as though there was an invisible force telling me to stay back, to let him go. But I couldn't. I stepped outside, my breath coming in short, cold bursts, and grabbed his arm once more. "Come on, Daniel, you're scaring me," I said, a little more frantic now. He turned toward me then, his eyes still closed. But it wasn't the same look I had seen before. There was something darker behind his expression. His lips curled into a twisted smile that didn't belong to him. It wasn't my son anymore. He shook his head slowly, like he was struggling against whatever was controlling him. "No," he whispered, barely audible. "I have to go. They're waiting." The words sent a shiver down my spine. "Who's waiting, Daniel?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just kept walking, like he was being pulled forward against his will. I had no choice. I had to get him back inside. I grabbed him and pulled with all my strength, practically dragging him toward the door. His body went stiff, as if it had turned to stone. It took everything I had to get him back inside, and even then he didn't resist. I tucked him into bed, sitting beside him until I could hear his breathing even out. When I was sure he was asleep, I finally let myself breathe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in control of him that night. Something that had led him outside with a purpose. And that wasn't the end of it. The next night, it happened again, and the night after that. Every time he would wander to the same spot by the front door, stand there for a few minutes, and then walk outside, always without a word, always like something was pulling him out there. I started staying awake, keeping a closer eye on him, but no matter how hard I tried to stop him, I couldn't. Every night he would slip away in his sleep as if someone or something was controlling his every step. I started asking him about it during the day. "Daniel, do you remember anything about what happened last night?" But he'd always shake his head, looking confused. "No, Mom, I don't know what you're talking about." And I couldn't tell him the truth. I had to admit I was scared. I wasn't just dealing with a sleepwalking problem. I was dealing with something else entirely. And whatever it wasn't going to stop until it had gotten what it wanted. The house was old, older than I ever imagined, and the price was just too good to pass up. I'd been looking for something with character, a fixer-upper that wouldn't break the bank. When I saw the listing for the Victorian on the edge of town, I knew it was the one. The realtor had warned me about the condition, about the history of the place. Apparently it had been on the market for years. But none of that mattered. I was sold from the moment I saw it. I remember walking through the front door for the first time, inhaling the scent of aged wood and dust. The floors creaked under my feet. The staircase groaned as if it had stories of its own to tell. Every room was an invitation to imagine life from a different time. I could already see myself living there, restoring it to its former glory. It felt like home. But the first few weeks were spent in solitude. The house needed work, and I was the one to do it. It was a slow process, peeling wallpaper, replacing old fixtures, and sealing cracks in the foundation. The previous owners had left in a hurry, and the house had been empty for years. I had a few friends help me with the heavy lifting, but most of the work I did alone. I enjoyed the quiet, the feeling of getting to know every inch of the house. The only thing that ever bothered me was the attic. It wasn't much of an attic, more of a crawl space. The stairs leading up were steep and narrow, the ceiling low. Dust hung in the air, thick and choking. The old wooden beams above seemed ready to collapse at any moment. But there was something about the place that intrigued me. It was the kind of space that begged to be explored. And so, one afternoon when I found myself with a bit of free time, I decided to check it out. I brought a flashlight with me, the beam cutting through the shadows as I slowly climbed the stairs. The attic was cramped, full of boxes and old furniture covered in yellowing sheets. The floor was littered with forgotten objects, things that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades. As I moved through the room, brushing aside cobwebs and dust, I came across something strange, a large leather-bound ledger. It sat there, wedged between two old crates, its cover worn and cracked with age. The spine was stiff, as though it hadn't been opened in years. Curiosity tugged at me and I pulled it from the pile. The book was heavy, the pages thick with yellowing edges. I opened it carefully, wondering what kind of history I had stumbled upon. I expected it to be full of old records or perhaps some forgotten family genealogy. What I didn't expect was what I found. The pages were meticulously organized with rows and rows of names, dates, and descriptions. The first few pages seemed normal enough, just a list of names and dates associated with the house. The names of the first owners, followed by subsequent families who had lived here over the years. But as I flipped through the pages, something started to feel off. The entries weren't just names. Each one was accompanied by a detailed account of the individual's life, as though someone had been keeping track of everything that had happened to them while they lived in this house. But here's the thing. Not all of the entries were for people who had ever actually lived here. Some of the names were of people who had never even made it to the house. People who were supposed to move in, but for some reason or another they never did. And then there were the others, the ones who had never been born. Their names were listed with the dates of their expected arrival, but there was no record of them ever stepping foot in this place. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was some kind of old census or family record, but it felt strange. It was as though this ledger was recording something far more personal, far more unsettling. I kept flipping through the pages, and as I did, I began to notice patterns. The entries for the people who had never arrived were always marked with a cross, a red line through their name, as if they had been erased from the house's history. But even stranger, there were some names that were written in a different ink, darker and almost urgent. I kept reading. One name caught my eye. Sarah Albright. She was listed as a potential resident in the 1920s, but she never moved in. I skimmed the rest of the details. She was a young woman, eager to start a family. Her name was crossed out, but beneath it, in that same dark ink, was a new name, Alma Kensington. The two names were connected like a before and after, and I couldn't help but wonder why. The more I read, the more I felt a creeping unease settle over me. There was something about this ledger that didn't make sense. It wasn't just a record of past tenants. It was a record of people who were meant to live here but didn't or couldn't. I stayed in the attic for hours, going through the pages one by one. The more I looked, the more it felt like the house was trying to tell me something that I wasn't ready to understand. It was as though the house itself had been keeping track of every person who had ever come into contact with it, even those who had never actually set foot inside. When I finally closed the ledger, I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I made my way back down to the main floor, but the air in the house felt different now. Heavier, thicker. I didn't want to admit it, but the house felt alive, like it had a memory of its own, a history that it wasn't ready to forget. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah Albright. Who was she? Why had she never moved in? And why did her name lead to someone else's? The next morning, I went back to the attic thinking I might have missed something. But when I opened the attic door, I froze. The ledger was gone. Panic rose in my chest. I checked the attic again, searched every corner, every box. There was no sign of it. I even checked the other rooms, but it was as if the book had vanished into thin air. I didn't know who could have taken it. I was the only one living there, and I hadn't told anyone about it. Days passed, and I tried to forget about the ledger, but it haunted me. It felt like it had been more than just a book. It had been a map of the house's past, a record of everything that had ever happened here. And now that it was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been lost. I began to notice things around the house that I hadn't before. Small things, odd things. The way the door to the basement would creak open on its own, or how the floorboards in the hallway would shift under my weight as though they were reacting to my presence. It was as though the house was trying to tell me something, trying to communicate, but I didn't know how to listen. I found myself returning to the attic over and over again. Each time I searched for any sign of the ledger, but it was always gone. I couldn't understand why I was so drawn to it. It was as though the house had marked me in some way, like it knew I was supposed to be here, that I was part of its story now. One night, as I was heading upstairs to bed, I heard a noise, a faint scratching sound coming from the attic. I froze, my heart pounding. It wasn't the usual creaks of the house settling. This was different, more deliberate. I hesitated for a moment, then made my way up to the attic, the stairs groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The attic door was open, and there, in the middle of the room, was the ledger. It sat on the floor as if it had never been moved. But when I opened it, I didn't find the names of the past. I didn't find the people who had lived here before. I found my own name, and next to it, a date. May 9th, 2025. I wasn't just living in this house. I was part of it now, marked in its pages, just like everyone else who had ever lived here. I didn't know what to make of it or what would happen next. All I knew was that the house had already begun to claim me. I was its next entry, and I was running out of time. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.